Hi there, my name is Toby and today I'm continuing with my Aether Physics series. And today I want to explain how epigenetics really works. Okay, it's a new thing now, people are talking about it, but again, it's still not explained properly. How does this really work? There is an actual science to this, and it is based on Aether Physics. So I'm going to lead up to this and explain this to you, how epigenetics really works. And this is to do with the energy body. It's to do with morphic resonance. Morphic resonance. This is an idea created by Professor Rupert Sheldrake. If you haven't heard this before, you can look it up. Morphic resonance by Professor Rupert Sheldrake. But really, that's just the energy body, the astral body, and I'll lead up to that. Now, before I can get there, I've got to recap on the last lecture, scalar waves, because that is a very important one. That's the deepest talk so far in which I'm explaining the interaction between metaphysics and physics. You see, this Aether Physics is the real deal. It's the real deal. It seems like just pure fantasy philosophy, but it's not. It's not. It's the underlying real physics. And once I can explain this properly, and finally, it will integrate with modern physics. It will actually give all the answers. You see, modern physics, modern science has got so many questions. It's got so convoluted, so complicated. Quantum mechanics has made this very difficult. And they have so many unanswered questions, so many paradoxes. Aether Physics will answer all of those. It will literally solve all the problems. Now, it's going to take me a while, of course, to explain it to that level. But step by step, I'm getting there. So again, it's a leap of faith. Please give me a chance. Listen to this series and see if you can understand what I'm talking about and how this is actually closer to reality. This is not fantasy. I put it to you, modern physics, quantum mechanics is fantasy. It's a conceptual idea. It's a mathematical framework, a model. It's a model of the universe. It's not the universe, a model of the universe. And that model is not good enough. It's got them so far. You know, I'm not denying the engineering. I'm not denying the experiments. I am denying the explanation of those experiments. You can have a correct experiment. You can even read the correct results, but you still can draw the wrong conclusion. It's very deep to understand this. So they're trying to keep on finding deeper and deeper experiments, understand more and more, but they will not understand any more because the very model, the fundamental model they are using in quantum mechanics is basically still materialism. They're not going to the next step into metaphysics. Can't understand metaphysics. And metaphysics is the ether. Now, what is metaphysics? Okay, let's ask another question. What is potential energy? We all know what energy is. Well, again, they haven't defined it. But if you look at my very first lecture, I talk about all this. But we all know energy. And then modern science talks about potential energy. But what is potential energy? What is it? It's metaphysics. It's not physics. There's no energy yet. It's only potential energy. Energy has not yet manifested. It only exists in potentiality. And my definition of the ether is infinite potentiality. So in a particular physical system, you will have a limited potential energy, but it's still potential energy. Potential, not actual. So that is still metaphysics. That is still in the ether. Only when that potentiality has been given a method to release itself, and the method of releasing potential energy requires space and time. You see, there's no space and time in potential energy. Potential energy does not exist. It's metaphysics. Nothing has happened. It's purely conceptual, abstract. That's why it's very hard to get our head around this. Only when it manifests can we say, oh, there's energy. Potential energy, how is this even created? Potential energy is created through geometry, or the potential energy in a system, an existing system, is created through geometry. Even in a limited sense. Let me take this. Okay, I've got this lovely cube here. A beautiful cube of iron pyrite, fool's gold. It's a natural, perfect cube. Let's just say, relative to the table, if the cube is down here on the table, it has no potential energy. If I lift it up away from the table, now it's got some potential energy. Potential energy. If I let go, it's released. As it falls down, it requires space and time to release that potential energy. If I hold it up here, hold it stationary, nothing has happened. There is no energy here. It's only potential energy. Where does this potential come from? Well, of course, we know it's gravity. But again, if you listen to my series, gravity is just magnetism. Still only one force in the universe. But I've said all that so many times. Let's just call it gravity so we understand. This potential comes because there is a force pulling it down towards the table, gravity. But if I just hold it here, that force of gravity has not manifest. It's still unmanifest energy, potential only, not actual. It's still metaphysics. And why is that potential energy created? It is created because of geometry. I have moved it from here. It's unified geometry. I've now moved it up to here. I've created a distance, a line. I have changed its position. That is geometric. I have created a geometry in space, and that geometry has created a potential energy. But remember, it's only potential. There's no manifest energy. I can't look inside this cube now and say, oh, it's got more gravity. Something has happened. No energy has gone into there. It's only potential energy, unmanifest. You can't register it. It's only registered when I drop it. But we can say it's got potential energy because I have given it a geometry. Geometry creates potential energy. And we can see it now here in this limited system of me, of the table and the rock, the crystal. But it works on, once you understand that, you see how it works. The ether is geometry. Potential energy, not energy. Potential, unmanifest energy. Only when it is manifest do we have space and time, do we have this material world. So if you can understand that, it means metaphysics comes before physics. Geometry comes before electromagnetism. Okay, the ether is potential energy. Actual energy is electromagnetism. But there's two components to electromagnetism. Electrostatics, which in the old days was called dielectricity. That just means a potential. A potential. You see this potential I've created here? Potential energy. But there's nothing happening. It's metaphysics. It's conceptual. It is because there is a geometry here, a distance between it. And again, it's like a mountain. You have a rock on the top of a mountain. It's a loose rock, but it can't fall down. It's just stuck there on the mountain. It will be stuck there on the mountain for millions of years. Nothing happening. It's still got potential energy relative to the ground, but unmanifest energy. Static. A static potential. That is dielectricity. That is the same thing as static electricity. If you take a battery, let's say here's a battery, and you have a plus and a minus on a battery. These are two things. They're separate apart. They're distance apart. This is a potential energy, unmanifest potential, nothing has happened. It is still the ether. Look at it this way. If those two things came together in a battery, the battery would discharge. There'd be no potential. It'd go to zero. But if I separate them in the battery, now we've got a potential energy. They call it electrical energy. Doesn't matter what you call it, it's a potential. A potential. And if you hold them here, it's static. This is static electricity. It's not moving. Only when you bring them closer, they touch, boom, it will release, and then it will discharge, and there'll be zero. No potential. The potential is gone. I create the potential in a battery. I release the potential in a battery. The potential energy is metaphysics, created by geometry, the separation of the anode and the cathode, the plus and the minus. When I bring them together again, that takes space and time, boom, it releases. That potential is released. Do you see? This is the difference between metaphysics and physics. Now, they call this potential energy all different things. Like I said, that's gravitational potential. That is electrostatics. But the thing is, this is electrostatics because it is static. When it comes into motion, there will be magnetism. If I put a wire across here, magnetism will be created, and that allows the discharge. Again, I've explained this in my series in great detail. So if you can understand this, the static geometry, the static field comes before the movement. The potential energy comes first, then the actual energy comes second. The potential is created, that comes first. Only then can you have a wire going across that releases that potential, then you've got some movement. Remember, the rock on the top of the mountain, it's stuck forevermore. Nothing will happen. But if one day the mountain is vaporized and the rock remains, it will drop. But nothing will happen until that mountain is vaporized. And only then will that rock come into space and time and move. Movement and will release that geometry. That geometry will return to its lowest state of energy. But remember, it goes further than that. Even the rock hits the table, there's still another potential inside material substance itself. This is a cube of potential energy. We know that. There is potential energy locked in the atoms. If we can break up the atoms, that potential energy will discharge, release. But it is stuck in the atoms forevermore. These atoms will stay as they are forevermore unless something happens to them to release that potential. So that potential energy in an atom is still metaphysics, created by the geometry of an atom. And I've explained this over and over again before. A fundamental particle is created by electromagnetism looping back on itself, spinning round and round. It's got itself in a geometry, spinning round and round itself, chasing its own tail. It's stuck in that geometry, that fundamental geometry of a sphere. But it's really a vibration, a frequency, but it's locked into that frequency. Therefore, it has become a potential, a static thing in its own right. The ether is there in the atom, potential energy of the atom. If you then break the atom, that potential energy can release, discharge, then you will have an explosion. Energy release. But where does it go? It goes off through space and time, gradually dissipating back to balance, to rest, to the ether. Do you see? Now, if you can understand this, now you can start to understand epigenetics. Because what is life? Again, we've got to take this to the next level. The ether, I've said this again over and over, but the ether is pure consciousness itself. Consciousness is a thing in itself. And the entire universe is created from this consciousness. But what is consciousness? Consciousness is pure potentiality. It is potential. Consciousness is not thinking, but consciousness is the potential for thinking. Consciousness is not acting, doing things, but consciousness is the pure potential for acting, doing things. Consciousness is not the soul, but it is the pure potential from which the soul arises. So consciousness is pure spirit, metaphysics, potentiality, potential energy. Not yet energy, potential energy. Outside space and time. Nothing has happened yet. But a soul, when you create a soul, a living being, a soul is that spirit focused into a particular geometry formation, like an atom. An atom is a particular geometry formation, a sphere, a vibration. But it is now locked into that geometry such that it is now a limited potential. So the unlimited potential of consciousness forms into a geometry, a sphere, a point of consciousness, and that you can call a soul. But it is still now the potential. It's a limited potential of spirit. A limited potential of consciousness is a soul. But when that soul takes life in this body and starts acting, now that potential is releasing. Do you see? Consciousness is the ether, pure potentiality. And I'll leave another link to a video below that I left in the last video to Tom Montauk, who's done a great little video on scalar waves. And in that he calls the ultimate potential energy the scalar super potential, which is just the ether. But I quite like that word he said, the scalar super potential, because that tells you what it is. It's the underlying potential energy beneath all potential energies. It's only potential. All potential is abstract metaphysics. It's not real yet. It's potential. You see, in a battery again, it's got a voltage that is a potential, but there's no electricity, no energy coming out of it, nothing happening. It's static. Until you put a wire across it, or until you move these closer together, bang, you get lightning, a spark. Then the potential is released. And it's created through the geometry, the separation of these two things. The geometry of a soul is created by the separation of a limited potential of consciousness from the unlimited potential of consciousness. A localized formation of spirit, a soul, separates from the unlimited spirit, the ether. That has created in itself a divergence, a geometry that creates the soul. And again, you can look at it, the divergence of the ether, pure unlimited consciousness creates a sphere. That is a point of consciousness. But there's one more level up from that, from that point of consciousness to create a body, a morphology. It has to create a geometry. Again, now we're going to move to epigenetics. This is the energy body. But the first geometry for a soul, which is a point of consciousness, a sphere will stretch into an egg shape, an egg formation. Okay, now we're getting quite philosophical. It's very hard to grasp this. But the egg formation is the perfect manifestation and the simplest manifestation of the golden ratio mathematics. And the golden ratio mathematics governs all interactions of the universe. It governs the very balance between metaphysics and physics. Again, very, very deep. It's the fundamental law of the universe, is the golden ratio, proportionality. And that is the secret of geometry and the power in geometry and how geometry creates potential energy. Geometry comes first before energy. And geometry, i.e. the golden ratio, is to do with relative proportions. You see, in a battery, the energy only comes because of the relativity of the anode and the cathode. It's relative between these two things. It's relative. In the same with gravity. It's the same thing. It's relative. This is relative to the table. But actually, it's more than that. It's relative to everything else. So if I do this, it changes its potential energy relative to the table, but it's still changing its potential energy next to this crystal, and next to this one. But the potential energy difference between these two things is so slight. We only notice it with the table. It's always relative. Again, a magnetic field. I've got the magnetic field here. Here's two magnets. It's relative. I can't push it in. I can't push it in. If I have it here, there's less force. Closer, more force, more force, more force. I can't push it in. It's relative to these two things. The geometry of these two things creates the potential energy. The closer I push them together, the more potential energy I am creating. If I let go, this will fly away. I'm creating massive potential energy by trying to push these two magnets together. That is geometry. Moving them closer together. That's geometry. Metaphysics. The position of these two magnets is abstract thing. It's a number. It's a distance. It's abstract. It's mathematical. It's geometric. Very, very deep. Very deep. So the fundamental geometry for the creation of a soul, a living being, is an egg formation. Because that is the fundamental geometry of the golden ratio. And again, that's very high level. That is still in the ether. That is pure geometry for its own sake. But when consciousness can formulate into an egg shape, now from there it's got a balance. Something is happening. Again, the egg has taken a sphere and stretched it apart. We have now starting to get a balance between metaphysics and physics. And from the egg, you can have now inside the egg the formation of an energy body. The morphology of a human being. You see, it's no accident that we have eggs in nature. A bird egg, a reptile egg, which we call them lower life forms. But every animal is born into an egg, an energy egg. But it's energetic. We can't see it. A bird has got a physical egg. But inside the egg, the little bird is still growing and he has to break out of the egg. For us humans, when we're born, we're so vulnerable. We're still in an energetic egg. Our parents are still meant to maintain our energy field, look after us, keep us safe, protected in this bubble, this egg of energy. When we reach puberty, that's the time when we become an adult. We break out the egg and now we have our own energy field. Our parents no longer protect our energy field. That's now up to us. So the egg is the fundamental morphology. Again, this is going to be a difficult philosophy to get, and you'll have to do a lot of thinking about this, and I'll come back to it more and more. But from the egg, it can come down into a body, this humanoid morphology. But again, it is a geometry. What is this body? It is a formation, a geometry. The external, it's a codex, the Human Codex, I've called it. It's the external geometry of a body. And this morphology, this geometry, the humanoid geometry, is the most efficient geometry for a self-aware being to interact with the material world. And this geometry of a body is just geometry. If I stay still, nothing happening. But if I suddenly move, something's happening. But this geometry itself is potential energy. Again, remember, geometry comes first. And the geometry is an abstract thing. It's metaphysics. It's just an idea. But the geometry is the thing that creates the potential energy. And the potential energy then manifests through the body. So now what this means is the energy body comes before the physical body. The energy body comes before the physical body. And the soul body, the egg, comes before the energy body, the astral body. And the point of consciousness comes before the egg. And the absolute totality of the ether, spirit, comes before the point of consciousness. So that is the scalar superpotential, the underlying infinite potential, how it gradually manifests downwards into finite potential, i.e. this body, And as I go through my life, I'm using up that finite potential until this body finishes, and then it's gone. Potential energy has been used up. Now, if you can understand this, now you can start understanding epigenetics. Let's go back a step. I've talked about genetics before. The fundamental geometry of life is DNA. Every living thing will have DNA. Anywhere in the universe, it will all have DNA. And every self-aware being will have a humanoid structure. Everywhere in the universe. You can have bigger ones and smaller ones, but it must be humanoid. You can have infinite varieties of humanoid structure, but it must still be humanoid. Because that is based on the mathematics of the golden ratio, efficiency. You see, remember, geometry and mathematics has already calculated what is the most efficient morphology for a self-aware being, and it's humanoid. It's not going to create anything else that's less efficient. It will not have a less efficient body. This is the most efficient design. Therefore, it's all humanoid at the level of self-awareness. Lower levels of awareness can have different morphology, animals. But again, this morphology is what Rupert Sheldrake calls the morphic resonance, a morphic field. So that shape is the thing that governs the creation of an animal or a human. And I'm saying the same thing here, but I'm explaining it from a deep philosophy of ether and metaphysics. You've got to understand metaphysics. So DNA is the building block. From that, the DNA divides to create the cells, so that step by step we can build up the body. But what controls the DNA? Here is the problem. See, the DNA, again, they look at it and they think, oh, we could change these little bits in the DNA and that will change it. And to some extent, yeah, you mess around with the DNA, change it a bit, and you get a slightly different organism growing. But you can only change it so much. You see, you can't create an organism that is inefficient. It just won't work. And they also noticed that it always jumps back a bit. 2 or 3 generations, the DNA reverts back. And they don't know why. And also, the DNA is always changing. Just slightly. It's always changing all by itself. So it doesn't matter what you do to manipulate the DNA, in all your fancy genetics, it always changes by itself. These they call random mutations. Random mutations. And even they say it, oh, radiation will cause mutations in the DNA. They say that, oh, radiation causes mutations. And that's ever so cheeky, because now we've got radiations hitting us, microwave radiation in the atmosphere from all our smartphones, but they tell us, oh, that's not harmful. No, there's no danger to that microwave radiation. But at the same time, they tell us, oh, radiation does cause mutations in the DNA. But but that one, no, that won't cause any problems. So they know radiation affects DNA, but they also say it's also random. No, they're not random, it's radiation. Now, there's other experiments been done which proves this to another level. I've mentioned it before, but this is real mainstream science has done this. They've taken an animal, I think it was a tadpole, so a frog embryo. And if you've got the growth of a tadpole, and you've got the tail of the tadpole and the head of the tadpole, and you measure the voltage, the static energy on the tail, and you measure the voltage across the head, again, the static potential across the head. You measure it, there's a difference in voltage. Then, if you take the voltage from the head and put it across the tail, and you take the voltage from the tail and put it across the head, the whole thing will swap. The tail will grow into the head, and the head will grow into the tail. So that means the static voltage is actually what controls the growth. It's not the DNA. The DNA is doing what it's told by the static field, the voltage. And again, you've seen it, the DNA is affected by radiation. In other words, the DNA picks up its information from the electromagnetism. And it's designed to do that. It's a double helix spiral, it's tiny. And they've measured the spiral and it resonates with particular wavelength of light. It's literally designed to pick up electromagnetic radiation. So the DNA, you cannot control the DNA by cutting it up, splicing it. You can, only to a tiny little bit, but it won't last. So again, that's a fanciful idea that they've got lost in because they're stuck on materialism. The only way you can control the DNA is with frequencies, with light, with radiation, with static fields. Now, once they work that out, then they'll start being able to do real genetic experiments. But it's not changing the DNA, it will be improving the health and the power of the DNA. And again, there's another guy that's done this years ago. Again, I don't remember the details. I'll leave the links below to Matt Roeske's channel. He talks about this. But it's old experiment from an old-fashioned science. And what this guy did was essentially grew animals. He did it with plants. He grew plants in a static electric field. Static field. And the plants grew bigger. That's electroculture. He did the same with animals. He grew fish. He grew amphibians inside a very strong static field. And they grew bigger. Same animal grew bigger and healthier and faster. In other words, the DNA had more power inside this potential energy. Remember, what is a static field? It's potential energy. It is the ether. So inside this potential energy, you have created a divergence of the ether. You've created a localized point of ether. That's the life force. It grows bigger, it grows more. And if you look at it in terms of the energy body, now, if you understand the geometry of a living being, if you give more static electricity, more electromagnetism to that initial morphology, then it allows you to have a bigger aura. It will allow you to grow bigger. So you literally grow a bigger size. So again, we're saying now in the old days we had giants, big people. And there's a lot of evidence for giants. I think it's well established now. Yeah, we've got giants. There's giant, you go to Ecuador, one of these South American countries, they got it in a museum, a skeleton of a giant. I mean, massive. I don't know what it is, 20, 30 foot tall giant skeleton. They find them all over the place, but of course they hide them away. It's not a big deal. Like I said, it's still humanoid morphology. You can have bigger ones or smaller ones. Now there might be some limit to the size. And again, you can't go too small because you need a certain level of brain size. So you wouldn't have a little human being this big. It wouldn't work. The brain would be too small. Not enough energy could get in there. But you could have a human being maybe this size, maybe this size would still work. But again, now you understand why that would be the case. Different static fields were around. If there was a different energy on the planet, you would have different size beings growing. And again, it would also go to the size of the planet. A bigger planet would have bigger gravity, but gravity is the same as the static field. It's the same field. It's all the same. It's a potential energy. So if you have a bigger potential energy, it means more of the ether is present. Therefore, you can have a bigger aura, a bigger geometry, and the geometry comes first, so the body grows to fill up the geometry. And you could do an experiment again to suppress this. And no one's done this. Well, they might have done this, but and again, it's not a very nice experiment to do. But you could try growing an animal inside, no electromagnetism in a as minimal as electrostatic field, and they'll probably grow smaller. Or you could try growing an animal in a disharmonious electrostatic or magnetic field. Growing them with, grow them with really disharmonious frequencies. Disharmonious frequencies, you would get a mutated animal, disabled, formed badly. Now, again, this tells you all this stuff about, deformed bodies. It's got nothing to do with genetics. It's a certain percentage, but it's to do with the static fields, the energy. They said it. Remember, radiation causes random mutations. It's not radiation that causes the random mutations. It's disharmonious radiation. Disharmonious frequencies. Frequencies that take you out of this perfect geometry. Remember, if you could have the perfect geometry of an egg, this is the fundamental geometry required to grow a soul, a living being. So imagine you could create an egg-shaped electrostatic field in great power and keep that absolutely perfect, harmonious, egg-shaped electrostatic field. And in the middle of that electrostatic field, you grew an animal or a human being, right in the middle. And you maintain this perfect egg all the way through the growth. You would see a perfectly formed, quite a larger animal grow. And it will be perfect. No mutations. Powerful, healthy, strong DNA. No one's done this experiment. It's got to be the perfect geometry of an egg. You've got to get the perfect geometry. That is the secret of ether technology. You've got to get the golden ratio just right. If you grew this, and if you do the same thing, try and grow an animal in a random shape, disharmonious shape, geometry, with disharmonious frequencies coming in at all angles, and you grew the animal in the middle, it would grow deformed. It would grow weak, sick. It might not even grow. It might not even grow. They've done this experiment. People have put in a mobile phone. You take your mobile phone and you put it in a beehive. You've got a beehive, the bee's growing. Put the mobile phone inside the beehive and they watch it. All the bees go away and die. The frequency is disharmonious frequency and they can't survive. It's nothing to do with random mutations. Again, that's an excuse. This is an excuse done by the people who want to pump out the stuff because they don't care about us being sick. In fact, they want us to be. Because what does sickness do? Sickness is big business. They need us to be sick to sell us their medicine. And they are withholding the real medicine. The real medicine would be harmonious frequency, electrostatic fields, in which we could reharmonize our energy body. Remember, the energy body comes before the physical body. The energy body is the electrostatic field, the morphology. That gives the information to the DNA to reproduce, to replicate. The DNA is controlled by light and electromagnetism, static fields and moving fields. It's designed to do that. You can't cut it up and do things like that. Now put that one more level, epigenetics. That means we are already here now. But I am a soul. I am a soul, a point of consciousness. But that point of consciousness is pure potentiality. Outside space and time, no experience. It is the unconscious mind, the emptiness, a point. That point has created my soul, which is an egg. And that now egg surrounds my body. That's why I've got a body. That is already moving towards the physical world. Because now the point has been stretched out into an egg. And the base of the egg is moving towards the physical body. The top of the egg is moving towards back to the spirit. So the egg is this way. Again, abstract, metaphysics. Inside the egg is my energy body. That is just the geometry of this morphology. But because I am a conscious being now created, I can visualize this. I can recreate this. If I visualize the egg, very powerful. Then I visualize my energy body. I visualize the perfect morphology for my body. I visualize myself, my body in perfect alignment, perfect skeletal structure. I visualize the muscles, the internal organs, everything perfect. Exactly how I would want to be. Young, healthy, strong. I visualize it. Therefore, I create that energy body, that morphology. Then, that is what will go in to my DNA and tell it what to do. Now the DNA will have power, it will balance, and it will reproduce, replicate, and regrow my body to a healthier one, a stronger one. That is epigenetics. I tell the DNA what to do. This is how you do it. Look at it another way. You see, we think, oh, I'm getting older now, I'm getting weaker, I'm getting sick. And now we just got that in our head. I'm sick, I'm old, I'm weak, oh, I'm getting old. And that is an image in your mind. You have an image now of getting older. I'm getting older. So my energy body, my morphology is getting older. I'm visualizing it. So my DNA is copying that image. Oh, I'm getting older, I'm getting sick. So your DNA is getting weaker. The next generation of cells is getting weaker. You have done that yourself. There is a saying, is we do not die, we kill ourselves. In other words, you believe you are dying, therefore you die. If you truly did not believe you were dying, you would not. But it's a very difficult thing to truly believe that. You can't just say it, I am immortal. Yeah, that won't work. This is how you do it. You have to visualize yourself young, fit, healthy, strong, perfect morphology of an energy body. Inside an aura of an egg. And in the middle of the egg is a point of consciousness right here in your heart chakra. That is the seat of your soul from which the geometry emanates. And the geometry emanates, therefore the potential energy emanates. And if you keep maintaining that potential energy, that means when you use your potential, you're not wasting it. You've always got more. And you are telling the DNA what to do. This is how we regenerate. This is the real science behind epigenetics. You visualize the young, fit, healthy body you want. And you make it very strong in your meditations. And then you'll train your physical body to follow that pattern. So when I do exercises, I don't do the exercises like an old man. I have to come up young, fit, strong, healthy young man. Then I do the exercises. It's very real. This is how we do it. This is how we do it. So I hope this made sense. Again, this is an introduction. I'm going to talk more and more about this over time. But the energy body comes before the physical body. That's epigenetics. Build your soul power, visualize your energy body, and then integrate it into your physical body. That's the secret. That's the secret to longevity and ultimately even immortality. And even if you don't have physical immortality, you will have immortality of the soul, the energy body itself. Again, very deep. So thank you so much for listening. Please do leave me any questions or comments, but write your comment on the notepad and copy and paste it, because sometimes YouTube deletes my comments. I never do. I never delete a comment, but sometimes they vanish. It's not me. Then you can copy and paste it again. Try again. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you in any of these other videos here.